Hello, Black women across the globe. Hustle culture won't save you if you're a Black woman. I'm going to repeat that. Hustle culture will not save you if you are a Black woman. I had some thoughts for a while now, for a couple of days, and if I'm being honest, a couple of weeks, where I've gone back and forth with other women on different platforms, and we've had this discussion as Black women. We work harder, we have to achieve more in order to get a little bit of equality living in the US of A and in the diaspora in general. And why? Because racism. If you're going to be super simplistic, racism. But it's not just racism, ladies. It is anti-Blackness that is global. It is patriarchy. It is misogyny. And Black women, it's time. In 2025, we are halfway through the year. It is way past time to divest of hustle culture. That's right. Hustle culture will not save you. Why? Especially if you're a Black woman. Hustle culture was birthed by white supremacy. It's that notion that you have to work yourself to the bone in order to achieve basic comfort, basic safety, basic security, basic respect. And sadly, we bought into this. But if you're a Black woman who wants to live her best life, who wants to be healthy, who wants to be whole in mind, body, and spirit, you've got to start with decolonized self-care, because that impacts every area of your life. Not only will you find yourself building or reestablishing boundaries, you're going to find the more work you do on yourself internally in terms of self-caring, especially when it comes to decolonized self-care, where you're going back to the ways of our people, the natural healing modalities, the ancient ways of healing, the ancient ways of being as Black people and as Black women. There are so many traditions and healing modalities that were lost when our ancestors were enslaved and brought to this new world. Now, while we lost a lot, there are so many Black women in the field of research, anthropology, sociology, public health, and whatnot, who have done a lot of work in terms of recentering us as women, giving us the resources and education about what it means to practice self-care that is culturally relevant and contextual for us as Black women. I've said it before in other videos and other live streams. The version of self-care that's currently being marketed, and I want you to pay special attention to that word, marketed to us, is not for us, it's not about us, and it definitely will not heal us. The version of self-care that is out there is commodified, appropriated, decontextualized practices from other cultures around the world, with no respect, no deep work, or any kind of real connection to the people who created these practices that were largely community-based and deeply entrenched into their cultural ways of healing. Now, that's not to say that we cannot, as a people or as Black women, include things like the practice of yoga into our ways of healing. That's not what I'm saying. You have to decouple all of that from the white supremacy that repackaged all of that and is selling that to you now. And selling it to you at a price that you can't even access. Remember, given the context of being a Black woman in the US, being a Black woman in the diaspora, being a Black woman globally, there are a number of oppressive systems and structures that were put in place to what? Keep us out. Them, us. And so even things that you would think ordinarily off the top of your head have no connection or relevance to certain things, you find out that's not the case. Why? Because as human beings and living organisms on this planet we call Earth, despite what white supremacy would have you and other systems of oppression would have you believe, we are all connected, and we come from people and places that fundamentally understood that all life is connected. And because of that, you have to respect, honor, and set boundaries in order to live in alignment and balance and health and sustainability. None of what we see around us is promoting that or showing that or demonstrating that, rather. It is very toxic, it is very harmful, and at the end of the day, the only thing you get out of it is a depletion in your financial resources. I did, just for the sake of argument, I did a little research on my own in my local area here in the Midwest. And I just said, you know what, let me see if, what is out there in terms of, yoga. I love yoga, I love the martial arts, and I've grown up with martial arts particularly. And so I love all forms of physical exercise or activity around those kind of activities. And I decided, okay, you know what, let me just do a scan and just check websites and whatnot, do my own little research in my local area, because I tell my clients every time, find out what resources you can get your hands on that are not going to cost you anything but your effort. And so I did that, only to find not only is it exclusionary in terms of location, but a lot of these so-called studios were exclusionary in terms of cost, what it will cost you if you say you want to get into these spaces and start, getting your yoga girl life on. And it was disappointing, but not surprising when I found that a lot of these studios, they're exorbitantly priced. And a lot of them are truly about not so much the mind, body, spirit, barely has any of the ideology around the creation of this particular healing modality. I found that it was largely about, just like on other social, platforms, Instagram, whatever you want to, Tumblr or whatever. It's all about aesthetics, very superficial. And I've said it before, you wonder why you get all your little money together, especially the Black women who are hustling, making that money. I gotta make that money. They're stressed out, burned out, trying to heal. And they said, oh, if I can just get this money, cobble this money together to pay this exorbitant monthly fee. Some of these studios are at the minimum $100 on average, and that's per month. Please tell me how you, as an average working Black woman who's underpaid, in contrast to her non-Black contemporary, same level of education, etc., same work experience. Explain to me how Not only navigating systems of oppression in the real world, just in your daily life, trying to work, live your life and whatnot, but when it comes into the health and wellness sphere, and I've talked about this before too, when healthcare inequalities are real, and medical racism is real, and healthcare practices, unfortunately, are also impacted by those same systems. And it was just a confirmation of something I've already known. One, I've done my own work in that area. Also, anecdotally, and Black women talk about this all the time online, on threads, other, Facebook and other platforms. We have these conversations, and a lot of times they're saying, well, how do I XYZ? And that's why I always say, look for the free resources in your area. And I've provided resources in some of my videos as well. Therapy for Black girls. There's also the NAP ministry. Those all have helpful, paid and free resources that are tailored to Black women specifically. Now, getting back to this whole hustle culture. Hustle culture is built on white supremacy. It is very draining, it is very harmful, and it's detrimental to our health. And it also conditions us to remain in those toxic, maladaptive strategies we've been using to navigate systems of oppression. I talked about archetypes in earlier videos. I've talked about archetypes of Black women who are killing themselves trying to live hustle culture and existing in American society without self-care. I've talked about the Sisterella. I've talked about the strong Black woman. I've talked about the, the social justice warrior. I've talked about all of these various archetypes because they're all connected and are all maladaptive strategies for navigating hustle culture, i.e. white supremacy. And it's only when you start breaking this down that you realize this is super toxic, super destructive. And this is not by design. American individualism, let's pull yourself up by the bootstraps. They tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Meanwhile, they're cutting off your bootstraps. They're putting all these barriers in front of you and tell you, oh, you should be able. I did it. My family built generational wealth. Oh, I got this job. Oh, I got this pay raise. Oh, I talked to my supervisor and my manager and, negotiated for a higher pay. That's nice. But the realities of living in Black bodies tells a whole different story. And that's why creators like Stephanie Perry, Rashida Dow, Picky Girl Travel, one of the greatest things we can do for ourselves as Black women is practice, adopt, and internalize. Decolonize self-care, because that is the starting point for changing your life dramatically as a Black woman, in terms of your health, in terms of your wellness, in terms of your peace of mind and your mindset and access. It is liberation for Black women. And there's a reason why Audre Lorde spoke so much on self-care when she said self-care is political. She was one of the first to say that. But of course, that's been co-opted like so many of our other terminology and movements. That's been co-opted by a certain demographic that historically that's their modus operandi. But I'm not going to talk too much more about that. The point of the matter is hustle culture is killing us as Black women. It is impacting our health. It is impacting our wellness. It is carrying on with systemic oppression. And arguably, it's a way of tethering yourself and entrenching yourself even more into the oppressive cycles that we live in here in the US. I've talked about how part of your self-care as a Black woman, decolonize self-care. When I say self-care, I'm going to alternate between self-care and decolonized healthcare when I speak in the context of hustle culture. And you have to be, in order to practice decolonized self-care, you've got to become self-aware of your situation, what's going on with you. And that's why I always say, even to clients, I say, you've got to get a plan. You've got to take action. You've got to make a decision. You've got to make a plan. You've got to take action. Because the whole notion of even making a decision means that you've come to awareness that something needs to change. And the definition of crazy is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It is 2025, ladies. Nothing is going to change for us as Black women or Black people unless we decenter and decouple from oppressive systems. And one of the foundational pillars of that is decolonized self-care, because you have to center yourself. And it's unfortunate that even in our own communities, these maladaptive strategies have become so entrenched and codified in certain aspects of our culture that Black women have had to go this alone in a lot of instances. And I've said before in earlier videos, if your self-care, decolonized self-care strategy and toolkit and blueprint requires you to relocate geographically, you need to do that. And the only way to do that, to arrive at those conclusions, is to do your self-assessment. And when you do self-assessment, that means what? Awareness. That's what it means. And so I'm going to keep honing on this over and over again. Later on in the week, I'll put out another video. I've had other things going on, and I had some other thoughts too regarding burnout, hustle culture, and how it's out of control for us, because it's even parroted by our own people and community leaders about hustle, especially in the professional sphere and in business, in entrepreneurship, this whole notion of hustle culture. Ladies, divest. Just like a number of Black women are divesting from this toxic place that is the US of A, and going to build their lives and look for places that are not seeking to kill them, actively seeking to kill and oppress them, as part of their self-care strategy and blueprint, we've got to do the work. And I'm going to be talking more around geolocation, relocation when it comes to self-care strategies as well. I know it might seem that, certain Black women may be privileged in terms of saying, oh, I can move to another country and XYZ, but there are ways to geolocate as well. If you have decided or done your own self-evaluation, whatever you want to call it, that says, hey, I don't have the resources right now to geolocate that far. And so part of decolonized self-care is breaking down and divesting and freeing, liberating yourself from oppressive systems. And that's the stuff that's internalized as well as the external. We live in a society that is grossly unequal and has been for hundreds of years. This country was built on the enslavement of Black and Indigenous bodies, it was built on destruction and exploitation and violence against Black bodies and Indigenous bodies. And those wounds, those structures were never dismantled. And Audre Lorde again speaks on this. You can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. That's a whole nother thing, but they all tie into, yes, hustle culture. Because this whole notion that you can fix stuff in the place that you're being poisoned, that's a lie that's been told to us to keep us in that cycle of destruction. And a lot of other Black women in the health and wellness space too, and myself included, draw correlations or similarities between life here for us daily living in Black bodies, especially Black female bodies, to a deadly and abusive relationship with a partner. And we are weak. I'm so gratified to see that we as Black women are waking up to that. And we're going to have more discussions around that. I feel it's super important to have more discussions about that, and dive a little bit deeper, and then connecting that to decolonize self-care, because so many of us don't know. Even when we think we're working towards better health, don't know that what we're actually doing is entrenching ourselves further into oppressive systems and cycles of harm, and that is impacting our health. If you've gone to, say, a yoga studio or a gym or whatever, and there's no one or very few people that look like you, you know exactly how you feel. I don't need to elaborate. The more you become self-aware, the less you are tempted to put yourself in places of danger. I call these places danger. We've seen all over TikTok about how Black women went to yoga studios or gyms or were disrespected and all of that BS. And they're all, emotionally high and hot and angry and hurt and traumatized. Look, there are Black yoga instructors. There are Black wellness centers that center us, that are actually practicing decolonized self-care. You've got to do the work to start connecting with those entities. You don't need to go to a yoga studio too in order to do yoga. You can do that online. The NAP Ministry, there is I can't off the top of my head, there is a beautiful Black yoga instructor that practices decolonized self-care. She gives online classes. I'll drop those resources. I'll drop a link to her IG or her Threads page, and where she talks about, the kind of classes she offers both online and offline. And maybe if you're in her area, you can actually go into one of her physical locations. But she talks about how necessary, and I will restate the same thing, you can't heal in the place where you're being abused. You can't heal in a place where you're experiencing violence, mental, spiritual, physical violence. And that's why a number of times when we go to these places where where no one looks like us, there are no Black or brown bodies in that space, you wonder why you feel okay physically. Yeah, you feel like you did some exercise, but mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, there's no relief. You're still burned out. There's a reason for that. Hustle culture is white supremacy, and it's not going to save you. Hustle culture is one of the tools, one of the modalities of white supremacy. And that's one of the primary reasons why it's not going to save us as Black women. What will save you is decentering white supremacy, unpacking all that ish, healing yourself, working on yourself, gaining and reclaiming are healing modalities to heal yourself and to heal your community. Because for us, healing is both communal and individual. And it's not a commodity and shouldn't be treated as such. Largely what's out there, because it's been colonized and commodified and co-opted from various cultures, is a hodgepodge, a toxic hodgepodge of other healing modalities that have no context or cultural relevance from the people that built these structures, that you wonder why it's not doing anything for you. We as Black people, both here in the diaspora and on the continent, we had ancient ways of healing that recognized the connection between environment and individual as well as community, that recognized that everything is connected. And when you pull one thing out of alignment, something else gets pulled out of alignment, and that's unsustainable and destructive to not just the individual, but the community and environment as well. So I just wanted to get those thoughts out there. I know it's been, over my usual time when it comes to, putting out a video or going live. And so I said, let me do this today. So I hope this helps. And I hope this gets you grounded. Again, as I said before, go through the other videos and live streams that are available to you here on my channel. My name, giving you that, my name is Tonya Barango, and I am a decolonized self-care and health coach for Black women over the age of 40. And I help liberate Black women and help them center and reclaim their health and wellness so that they can thrive and get out of survival mode and burnout. So till next time, tune in. Thank you. And next time.